There are houses that grow cold from the outside in, and there are houses that grow cold from the center, because the people at the center have decided, long ago, that warmth is a luxury they cannot afford. You will account for every farthing of the winter coal order, Lady Marveth said, without looking up from her embroidery. Her needle pushed through the fabric with a small, deliberate sound, like punctuation. Every farthing, Miss Vane. I have it on good authority. The last housekeeper was padding the ledgers by 4 shillings a week. I will not have that practice continued under my roof. Isolde set the account book on the table between them and kept her hands still. She had learned to do that, to keep her hands still when everything else in her wanted to move. The parlor was cold. Lady Marveth had not authorized the fire to be lit until 11, and it was barely 9, and the chill in the room was the particular chill of a large house that was not heated by circumstance, but by deliberate policy. The coal order is accurate, Isolde said. I have the receipts from the merchant on Cutter Lane. You are welcome to compare them against the ledger line by line. I intend to. Lady Marveth's needle paused. What I do not understand is why the kitchen order was 12 shillings over the previous quarter. Because the previous quarter was summer. Coal is cheaper in summer. It is cheaper when purchased early. I purchased this quarter's supply in August, which is why the unit cost is lower than the year prior, but the household expanded by 2 staff members in September, the new footman and the laundry girl, and so the total volume increased. The arithmetic is in the notes column. A silence. The needle resumed. You are very quick to explain yourself, Lady Marveth said. I am accurate, Isolde said. That is why you hired me. It was, in fact, exactly why Lady Marveth had hired her, and they both knew it. The Marveth household, a rented townhouse on Alderley Street with pretensions well above its lease value, required someone who could manage 4 domestic staff, a cook, a coachman, and the elaborate social fiction that Lady Marveth was wealthier than she was. That was not a task for a decorative housekeeper. It required someone who could read a ledger, write a supplier letter, and negotiate a price without being cheated. Isolde could do all 3. She had been doing all 3 for 2 years and 4 months, at a salary of £38 per annum, which was £14 below the going rate, and which she had accepted because she had no alternative. That was the shape of her life at 24. She was the daughter of a solicitor who had died owing £1,100. She had spent 18 months after his death selling what could be sold, settling what could be settled, and discovering that a young woman of moderate education and no connections had very few options that did not involve either marriage or service. She had chosen service because it was honest and because, unlike marriage, it did not require her to be grateful. She was not, under any circumstances, going to be grateful. She was transcribing a supplier invoice at the small writing desk in the back corridor, a corridor that was, at this hour, slightly warmer than the rest of the house because it ran adjacent to the kitchen flue, when she heard the front door. Not a knock. Not the measured rap of a morning caller or the hesitant tap of a tradesperson who knew his place. The front door opened. That was the whole of it. It opened, and then there was silence of a particular quality, and then she heard Lady Marveth's voice from the front parlor, and it had a register in it that Isolde had never heard before. Fear, she thought, or something very close to it. She set down her pen and went to the corridor entrance. He was standing in the hall. That was the simple version. The fuller version was that he occupied the hall the way a storm occupies a landscape, not by moving through it, but by changing the character of it entirely. He was tall, not remarkably so, but tall in the way that men are tall when they also take up more space than their physical dimensions should account for, when the room reorients around them without their having asked it to. He wore a dark riding coat, dust from the road still on the shoulders, and he had not removed his gloves, which meant he did not intend to stay long, or he did not consider the house worth the courtesy. His hair was dark, cut close, and his face was not handsome, exactly. Something more angular than handsome, pale from the November cold, a jaw that looked like it had been set at a particular angle and left there. He did not look at the butler. He did not look at the footman who had appeared at the end of the hall. He was looking at Lady Marveth, who had come out of the parlor and was standing 3 feet away from him, as though 3 feet was the minimum safe distance. Your Grace, Lady Marveth said. Her voice had gone very careful. The debt, he said, just that. 2 syllables, dropped into the room like stones into still water. His name was Corvin Ashvere, the Duke of Rathmore. Isolde knew of him the way one knows of weather systems, by reputation, by the track of damage, by the accounts of people who had been in his vicinity when the pressure changed. He was called the Black Ledger in certain financial circles, not because he was cruel, but because he was precise, and precision in a man with his resources was its own kind of power. He had, so the accounts went, purchased 3 failing estates in the last 5 years, not out of sentiment, but because the debts attached to them were useful to him. He collected obligations the way other men collected paintings. Lady Marveth owed him money. Isolde knew this because she had seen the figure in a letter that had been left, carelessly, on the writing desk she was not supposed to read from. £840, accrued over 2 years of borrowing against the expectation of her late husband's estate, an estate which had turned out, upon proper accounting, to contain substantially less than expected. Isolde had not been surprised. She had seen the household accounts. "I have written to your man of business," Lady Marveth said. "I have explained the situation." "You have," Corvin said. "He explained it to me. I am here to explain it back to you in simpler terms." His eyes moved then, and they found Isolde. She did not step back. She was standing at the corridor entrance, half in shadow, invoice still in her hand, and she met his gaze the way she met most things, steadily, without performance. His eyes were dark gray, the color of November river water, and they registered her with the same complete attention he had given Lady Marveth, which was not what she had expected. Most men in his position looked through her. He looked at her. Then he looked back at Lady Marveth. "Bring me the household accounts," he said. "All of them. Current quarter and the 3 preceding." "I hardly think," Lady Marveth began. "The accounts," he said again, and there was nothing louder about his voice, nothing harder, only the absolute certainty that the sentence had ended and the next action was not in question. Isolde looked at Lady Marveth. Lady Marveth looked at Isolde, and in that look there was a message. Fix this, somehow, or find a way to make the numbers say something other than what they said. Isolde picked up her invoice, walked to the small cabinet where the current ledgers were kept, took out the 4 most recent volumes, and carried them to the parlor table. She laid them flat, opened to the current page, and stood back. "Your Grace," she said, because someone had to address him as such, and Lady Marveth seemed to have lost the capacity. "The quarterly accounts are current to last Friday. The previous 3 quarters are complete and annotated." He looked at the ledgers, then at her. "You keep these?" "I do." "Sit down," he said, and then, to Lady Marveth, not unkindly, but not gently either, "You may leave us." The next 40 minutes were the strangest of Isolde's professional life. The Duke of Rathmore sat at the parlor table and went through the ledgers the way a surgeon goes through a patient, methodically, without sentiment, with a focused attention that was almost unsettling to watch. He asked questions. They were not elaborate questions. They were 1 or 2 words each, pointed at a specific line, and Isolde answered them the way she answered Lady Marveth, accurately and without apology. This discrepancy. He had placed 1 finger on the coal account for the previous winter. 43 shillings over what the merchant's receipts would support. "That predates my tenure," Isolde said. "I arrived in May. The winter accounts were my predecessors. And this." His finger moved 2 pages. "A payment to a dressmaker in March, recorded under household sundries. Lady Marveth's personal gowns, charged to household expenses," Isolde said. "I flagged it in my notes. She overruled me." He looked at the note. He looked at her. "You flagged it. It is not a household expense." A pause. Something shifted in his expression, very slightly, in the way that certain things shift when a calculation resolves. Not warmth, exactly. Recognition. "How long have you been managing this household?" he said. 2 years and 4 months. "At what salary?" she told him. He said nothing, but he looked back at the ledger, and she had the sense that the number had been recorded somewhere internal, added to some accounting that was ongoing. He closed the final ledger. He looked at the wall for a moment in silence, and she had the feeling he was working something out, some problem that had multiple variables, and that he was solving it the way he apparently solved most things. Quietly, completely, without asking anyone else's opinion. Lady Marvith cannot pay the debt, he said. It was not a question. The household income does not support it, Isolde said carefully. Her quarterly income from the trust is £90. The current outstanding debts against the household are— she knew this number without opening anything, because she kept all the numbers— approximately £1,060. His eyes returned to her. You know that without looking. I know all of it without looking. Another pause. Longer this time. Miss Vane, he said, I am going to require an estate manager for Rathmore. The current man has been with the estate for 16 years and is retiring at Christmas. The estate runs to 4 tenant farms, a home farm, a forestry lease, and a secondary property in Wiltshire. He paused. I do not need someone who can manage a household. I need someone who can read a land account, negotiate a lease, and tell me when I am being cheated. The room was quiet. In the kitchen, somewhere below, a pot was set down on a stone surface with a small, definitive sound. Estate managers are not typically women, Isolde said. I am aware of what is typical, he said. The position would be inappropriate by any social standard. I have not asked for a social opinion. I have asked if you are capable. She looked at him. He looked back at her. The ledgers sat between them on the table like the accumulated weight of 2 years of her competence. What is the salary? She said. £80. The market rate for an estate of that complexity is 110. Something happened at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. The ghost of one, perhaps, or the shadow of the concept. 100, he said. Done, she said. Lady Marvith, when informed, was not pleased. She cycled through 3 distinct emotional registers in the space of 15 minutes. Outrage that Isolde would abandon the post, offense that the Duke had recruited from her own household, and a thin, cold fury that contained within it the knowledge that there was nothing she could do about any of it. The Duke had, in the same conversation, informed her that the debt would be addressed through a structured arrangement. The Alderley Street house would be surrendered at the end of the current lease, and Lady Marvith would remove to a more modest address in the country, where the trust income would cover her expenses without requiring further borrowing. He had delivered this information the way he delivered all information, in complete sentences, without embellishment, with the implication that the matter was already decided and the conversation was simply the formality of transmission. Isolde gave 2 weeks' notice and spent them doing what she always did when the ground shifted. She worked. She completed the quarter accounts, annotated them fully, wrote a handover document so thorough that even an indifferent successor would know where every shilling had gone, and she packed her 2 trunks, which contained everything she owned, into a space that would have fit in Lady Marvith's linen cupboard with room to spare. On her last evening in the Alderley Street house, she sat in the back corridor by the warmth of the kitchen flue and allowed herself, for exactly the length of time it took to drink 1 cup of tea, to be afraid. Not of Rathmore, not of the work, which she could do. She was afraid of what it meant to want something again. She had spent 2 years and 4 months being careful not to want things, because wanting things required hope, and hope required the assumption that the future held something for her, and that assumption had been knocked out of her so thoroughly when her father died that she had never quite gotten it back. She had managed on certainty instead. She knew what she could do. She knew what she was worth. She had kept her ledger balanced and her emotions off the books entirely. Corvin Ashvere was not a safe thing to want. She drank the rest of her tea, rinsed the cup, and went to bed. The road to Rathmore took 6 hours. The Duke sent his carriage, not the formal equipage, but a well-sprung traveling coach, dark blue, with a traveling rug inside that was wool on the outside and something softer on the in, and a basket that contained, with no accompanying note, a small cold pie, an apple, and a portion of cheese wrapped in wax cloth. She ate all of it because she was cold and hungry, and it was practical. She watched the country change out the window. The flat London outskirts gave way to something older, rolling and dark with the last of the autumn leaves, fields gone silver with frost, the occasional stand of bare trees against a white sky. Rathmore was in the north of the county, and by the time the carriage turned through the estate gates, the light had gone the color of pewter, and the air smelled of wood smoke and something mineral, like cold stone. The house was large, not ostentatious in the showy way of newly built houses. This was old large, the kind that accumulates over generations, where wings are added and then added to again, and the whole eventually stops being a plan and becomes a fact of the landscape. Stone, gray-white, with a central facade that had not been fashionable for 60 years and was the more imposing for it. 40 rooms, she had heard subsequently from the housekeeping staff. 40 rooms, 14 fireplaces, and one housekeeper, Mrs. Holt, who was forthright and compact, and looked Isolde up and down at the door with an expression that contained both wariness and a faint, deeply private relief. "Miss Vane," Mrs. Holt said, "we've put you in the east study. It runs warm. The chimney in the library below shares the flue, and the library fire is lit all day." "That is practical," Isolde said. "Thank you. His Grace said you'd say something like that." The east study was a room of moderate size with a window overlooking the kitchen garden, a fire already laid and lit, a writing desk with 3 drawers, and a full set of the estate accounts arranged on the shelf beside it. 4 years of quarterly ledgers, tied in red ribbon, as though someone had expected her to start reading immediately. She took off her cloak. She sat down. She opened the first ledger. The estate accounts were a disaster, not a corrupt disaster, not the gleeful, padding and pocketing disaster of Lady Marvith's household. This was the disaster of neglect, of a man who had been doing the work adequately for 16 years and had stopped learning anything new after the first 3. The tenant rents had not been reviewed in 7 years. The forestry lease contained a clause that had been favorable in its year of writing and had since become ruinously underpriced. The home farm was running at a loss, that a modest investment in the Southfield drainage would resolve within 2 seasons. She had a page of notes before she had been in the room an hour. She had 6 pages by the time Mrs. Holt knocked with supper on a tray, cold roast, bread, a pot of tea, and the intelligence that His Grace was in London until Thursday. London until Thursday. That was 5 days. She worked for all 5 of them without stopping except to sleep, and even then she dreamed in columns and lease clauses and rental assessments. On Thursday morning, she heard the horses in the yard. She did not go to the window. She continued writing her assessment of the Wiltshire property, which was in better shape than Rathmore, but had a tenant dispute that wanted careful handling. She was still writing when the footsteps came down the corridor, and she was still writing when the door to the east study opened. "You have been here 5 days, Corvin said, from the doorway. "Yes." She did not look up. She finished the sentence she was writing. He came into the room. He looked at the desk, which was covered in pages. He picked up one of them. He read it in silence for long enough that she glanced up. "The forestry lease," she said. "The current rate is 14 shillings per acre per annum. The market rate for comparable managed woodland in this county is 22. The lease renews in March. You should have your solicitor file the revised terms no later than the 20th of January, to give the required 60 days notice." He set the page down. He looked at her. "You have been here 5 days, he said again. "You hired me to work. I hired you 3 weeks ago. You accepted a salary of £100 per annum. You have not yet been paid." She had, in fact, noted this. She had not addressed it because she did not have the standing yet to demand it, and because she had been too absorbed in the accounts to give it her full anxiety. He set a folded paper on the desk beside her hand. She unfolded it. It was a bank draft for £25, a quarter's advance. She looked at it. She looked at him. Something in her chest did something unexpected, something that had nothing to do with the money, which she needed, and everything to do with the fact that he had thought of it without being asked. She was not accustomed to being thought of without being asked. "Thank you," she said, and her voice she kept it level, but it cost her slightly more than usual. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then, the tenant question at Wiltshire. "Mr. Ferris. The disputed boundary runs across what he is currently using as pasture. He believes the original survey was wrong. He may be correct. The 1798 survey was done by a man who made 2 documented errors on other local properties. The cost of a new survey is £12. If the boundary moves in Ferris's favor, you lose 16 yards of scrub that is not currently producing anything. If it moves against him, you will have a grievance that will simmer until the lease comes up and he leaves, which means 6 months with an empty farm and the cost of finding a new tenant. The £12 is worth spending." "Do it," he said. "Commission the survey. I will need your authorization in writing to instruct the surveyor. I will have it to you this afternoon." He left. She sat for a moment in the warmth of the east study, with the fire going and the bank draft on the desk beside her notes, and she thought that this was a strange kind of life she was building, but that it had, for the first time in a long time, the quality of solid ground. The weeks assembled themselves into December. The forestry lease notes were sent to the solicitor. The Southfield drainage was assessed by a local engineer and priced at £40, with a projected return to profitability within 18 months. The tenant rents were reviewed and a schedule of modest, staggered increases was drafted, generous enough to avoid grievance, accurate enough to reflect 2 years of inflation in input costs. Corvin reviewed every document she produced. Not cursorily, he read them, and when he had a question he came to the east study and asked it, and she answered it, and occasionally they disagreed, and when they disagreed it was a form of conversation she had not had before with anyone, a form in which both parties were permitted to be right, and the only relevant question was which of them was more right about the specific thing in question. 3 times she was more right, twice he was. Once they were both wrong, and a letter to the solicitor produced a third answer that neither of them had considered. She was aware that the staff had noticed something. Mrs. Holt did not say anything directly, but she had begun making sure Isolde's tea tray came with a second cup, and the footman who stoked the east study fire had developed the habit of doing it at 5 o'clock, which was when Corvin frequently appeared in the doorway with a question or a document or simply, and this was the part she was not sure how to account for, with no apparent purpose, other than being in the room where she was. The house had 40 rooms. She was in the east study. He was, with increasing frequency, there too. She did not name it. Naming it would require her to have an opinion about it, and having an opinion about it would require her to believe that it was real, and believing that it was real would require her to have hope, and hope, as she had carefully noted in the private ledger of her emotional accounts, was the thing she had decided she could not afford. And then the letter came. It arrived on a Tuesday, addressed to Corvin, but he was out at the home farm, and she signed for the correspondence as his estate manager, and when he returned, she placed it on his desk in the library, as she always placed his letters, sorted by sender, urgent on top. She did not read it. She had never read his correspondence. She went back to the east study. 2 hours later he came to find her. His face was not different exactly. It was set in the same lines, but there was something in it, a contained quality, more contained than usual, as though he was holding something together with additional effort. "Lady Marveth has filed a complaint with the registry," he said. She waited. "She has alleged that I coerced her household staff, specifically you, into leaving her employ under duress, and that the salary arrangement constitutes evidence of an inappropriate relationship." The fire crackled. A coal shifted. "She has also," he continued, "alleged that the household accounts you maintained for her contained errors of a fraudulent nature, and that those errors may have been introduced to cover misappropriation." For a moment she said nothing. Then, "The accounts are perfectly accurate. Every receipt is filed. The handover document I left is 73 pages and annotated to the line. I know that. She left me no alternative to leaving. You offered a lawful contract of employment at a market rate. The complaint is malicious. I know that too." He looked at her steadily. "The registry has a formal review process. They will want to examine the Marveth accounts and interview the relevant parties. My solicitor is Lord Ashwick's brother-in-law. He has handled matters of this kind before, but the process will take time, and during it, your professional standing is formally under question." She thought about this. £38 per annum, 2 trunks, a dead father's debt, 2 years and 4 months of absolute accuracy, a 73-page handover document, and Lady Marveth, with her embroidery needle and her cold parlor and her contemptuous patience, had found, in the end, one weapon she had not seen coming. "She is doing this," Isolde said slowly, "because you removed her from Alderley Street. I am the instrument. You are the target." He said nothing, but his jaw tightened. "Then the defense is the accounts themselves," she said. "The receipt archive. The flagged notes where I documented her own overrides. If I am present at the review, and the documents are presented in order, there is no case. There is only Lady Marvith's word against mine, and 80 pages of evidence. Yes, he said. I am not afraid of a review, she said. I am afraid of nothing that can be settled with arithmetic. Something happened to him then. It was not a large thing. It was the thing that happens to a structure when the last piece of tension releases. A barely perceptible settling. A breath taken fractionally deeper than usual. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in Lady Marvith's parlor on that first day, the way that was complete and specific, and that treated her as though she was an actual thing in the room, material and real, and worth the full weight of his attention. Miss Vane, he said, Isolde. Her name in his voice was different from her name in anyone else's voice. She did not examine this. She examined it completely and put it away. The review will be in London, he said. A fortnight from Friday. I will be present. You don't need to be present. The documents speak for themselves. I will be present, he said, in the tone that meant the sentence was finished. The fortnight passed in a strange double rhythm. The estate work continued. The forestry lease was filed. The survey commission went to the Wiltshire surveyor. The drainage assessment was approved, and the work begun on the south field. And underneath all of it, running parallel, the knowledge of the review and the daily, accumulated, unremarked fact that Corvin Ashfield was in the East Study most evenings and that the room was warm. 11 days. 13 days. The night before they were to travel to London, she could not sleep. She lay in the dark and listened to the house settle and allowed herself, for the first time, to think about what it would mean if the review went badly. Not for the position. She could survive losing the position. She had survived worse. What she could not survive, and this was the admission she had been keeping off the books, hidden in a column she had been refusing to open, was losing this particular proximity. This room, this fire, this ongoing conversation with a man who asked her questions as though her answers were the answers, not a version of the answer to be checked against a man's subsequent opinion. She got up at 5. She dressed. She went to the East Study and she lit the lamp and she wrote, for no purpose other than the need to put something in order. A complete inventory of the Wiltshire tenant situation. Names, dates, lease terms, the projected outcome of the survey. It calmed her. It always calmed her. The world, organized into columns, was a world she could manage. When the lamplight changed to gray dawn, she heard him in the corridor. He paused at the door. She did not look up. It is 5 in the morning, he said. I am aware. He came in. He did not sit at his usual place across the desk. He stood near the window, and in the new gray light his face was tired in the way of a person who had also not slept. She will say things in that room, he said, things designed to damage you publicly. She is very skilled at it. Let her. Isolde. Let her say all of it, she said. I have the ledgers. I have 73 pages of notes. I have 3 years of coal receipts, and a flagged entry for every single time she asked me to record a personal expense as a household one. She has ornamentation and spite. Those things do not balance a column. He looked at her for a long moment. The fire, which she had lit when she came in, had caught fully now, and the room was warm in that particular way it always was. Warm in a way that the rest of the house, all 40 rooms of it, was not. Why does she hate you? He said. It was not the question she had expected. Because I was accurate, Isolde said. People like Lady Marvith do not hate incompetence. Incompetence is manageable. They hate accuracy, because accuracy means that someone can see the exact shape of what they are. He was quiet for a moment. Then, your father. She stilled. My solicitor researched your background when I was considering the position. He told me about the debt. £1,100. You settled 600 of it yourself before you entered employment. I settled all of it, she said. Eventually. How long? 14 months after I started at Lady Marvith's. I was sending £18 per quarter back to the creditor's agent. I had £12 left of my salary by the end of each quarter. She had never said that to anyone. She had never said it because no one had asked, because no one had known to ask, because the people who employed her were not interested in the weight of what she carried, only in whether she could carry it without showing the strain. He moved from the window. He came to the desk and he stood beside it. not across it, and he looked down at her, and she looked up at him, and the lamplight was between them, warm and specific. "The review will clear you," he said. "The accounts are unanswerable. Lady Marveth's complaint is documented spite against a debt collection she cannot appeal. My solicitor will have it struck within 2 hours of opening." "Yes," she said, "but I want you to understand something before we go." He paused. "Whether or not the review clears you, whether or not the position at Rathmore is tenable after it, I want to say this before any of that is settled." She waited. "I do not know how to say ordinary things," he said. "I have not had cause to practice it. But you have been in this house for 6 weeks, and I find that I cannot locate a good reason to want you anywhere else." Another pause. "That is imprecisely stated." "No," she said quietly. "It is very precisely stated. The East Study is the warmest room in this house," he said. "I have told myself it is the flue from the library. I do not think it is the flue from the library." She looked at him for a long time. The fire settled. The pale winter dawn came through the window and touched the edge of the desk, and the edge of his jaw, and the white of his cravat. "I have been keeping a private ledger," she said, "of the things I am not going to let myself want." "I know," he said. "I have seen you doing it. You've been in this room quite a lot." "Yes." "The forestry lease is filed," she said. "The drainage contract is signed. The survey is commissioned. The Wiltshire dispute is documented. The quarterly accounts are current." She was listing these not because they were relevant, but because she needed to hold something solid. "The work is in order." "It has been in order for 2 weeks," he said. "You have been adding to it because you find the alternatives alarming." She laughed. It was a small, surprised sound, quickly contained, and she had not laughed in. She could not actually calculate how long. "Yes," she said. He reached down and turned the ledger on the desk closed, gently, with one hand, a deliberate gesture, a closing of accounts. "Isolde," he said. "This changes the nature of the position," she said. "Yes. I will not accept a sinecure. I will not accept a decorative arrangement in which I am given a title and a salary, and the actual work is done by someone else. I have been a dependent once. I was a housekeeper for 2 years and 4 months. I am not going to become an ornament. No," he said, very steadily. "You are going to become the Duchess of Rathmore, and the Duchess of Rathmore, in this house, manages the estate accounts, disputes the forestry leases, commissions the land surveys, and has a full and equal voice in every decision that affects the 4 tenant farms and the secondary property in Wiltshire, because that is what this estate requires." He paused. "And because that is what you are." She stood up. They were very close. She could see the gray of his eyes, the particular still quality of his face, the effort in it, the effort of a man who had stored things for a very long time and was, for the first time, permitting something to come forward. She put her hand on the ledger, which was between them on the desk. "The accounts," she said. "Balance." He took her hand. His fingers were warm. The room was warm. Outside the window, the frost was on the kitchen garden, and the dawn was coming up cold and white over the north country. And inside this room, in this one room out of 40, everything was entirely and precisely warm. The review in London lasted less than 2 hours. Lady Marveth arrived in an elaborate day dress, and with a prepared speech that ran to ornate, comprehensive contempt. She described Isolde as a scheming opportunist, a woman of suspect background, who had manipulated a vulnerable household and then abandoned it under coercion from a wealthy patron. She was confident in the speech. She had practiced it. The solicitor placed the Marveth accounts on the table, all 4 quarters, with Isolde's annotations, with the flagged entries and the receipts filed in order, and the 73-page handover document, every line of which could be cross-referenced against an independent merchant receipt. Lady Marveth's solicitor looked at the documents. He looked at Lady Marveth. He looked at the documents again. The complaint was withdrawn before lunch. Lady Marveth left without speaking further. She did not look at Isolde on her way out. She looked at the table, at the accounts, at the undeniable paperweight of 2 years of accurate work, and then she looked at nothing in particular, and she walked out, and her footsteps in the corridor diminished and were gone. Corvin stood beside Isolde as the registrar finished his notes. His arm was near hers, not quite touching. Then it was touching. 2 hours, she said, quietly. I told you. You told me less than 2 hours. I was accounting for the length of her opening remarks, he said. She was thorough. She was. The registrar looked up. He looked at them both. Some small confusion passed across his face. An estate manager and a duke, standing in his office with their arms touching, and then it resolved, as things tend to do, into the simple evidence in front of him. 2 people who had brought every document, 2 people whose accounts were in perfect order. Everything appears to be in order, the registrar said. Yes, said Isolde, it is. They were married in the vestry at Rathmore on the 4th of February, a Tuesday, which was a practical day to marry because all of the tenant leases renewed at quarter day in March, and Isolde wanted the documentation amended before then to reflect the change in signatory. The ceremony was attended by the solicitor, Mrs. Holt, the 4 tenant farmers and their wives, and a cousin of Corvin's who came up from London and spent the first hour looking at Isolde with unconcealed assessment, and the second hour looking at the way Corvin looked at Isolde, and after that stopped assessing and simply looked pleased. The Southfield drainage was completed by March. The forestry lease renewed at 22 shillings per acre. The Wiltshire survey came back in Ferris's favor, and he stayed for another 10 years. The estate accounts, for the first time in a long time, closed at the end of the year with a surplus. Isolde wrote the year-end summary at the East study desk, as she always did. Corvin was in the chair beside the fire, reading a letter from his man of business in London. The fire was high. The kitchen flue was doing what it always did. The room was warm. There are houses that grow cold from the center, and there are houses that do not, that hold their warmth in one room and let the whole 40 of them be organized around it, the way a household is organized around the thing that is true at its center. If you have ever sat beside a fire that was not just a fire, but the warmth of someone who has finally, after a very long accounting, decided to stop keeping certain things off the books, then you already know what this room felt like. You already know.